Well, it's the start of a new school year, and I'm really pleased to welcome Don Austin, the superintendent of the Palo Alto Unified School District, to join our webcast today to talk about a lot of stuff. Don, thank you.
Well, thanks for having me.
Among the many items that are facing the district, you've introduced the Paused Promise. Mm-hmm. It's a 12-point vision setting, goal setting document that lays out a whole bunch of different aims for the district, from supporting minority students, special ed, best practices, social emotional learning. Oh, there's a lot of stuff there. Yeah. And I kind of wanted to ask you first just about the development of that document and kind of just give us a high-level view of what it is and what parents should expect from it.
Sure. Last year was so different. You come into a new place and you have this transition period, and you're inundated with opinions and thoughts about things that need to be touched immediately, things that haven't gone as well as maybe people would have wanted. And people ask you for your vision. And the reality is, you just got here. So, I'm trying to learn names and find where things are. It's not the time to come outline a vision. But throughout the course of the year, I started with looking at the documents that we did have. There'd been a lot of committee work and board work and initiatives that were either planned or implemented over time. So I went back to those documents and I had them laid on my desk for the better part of the year, reading through those, highlighting. And I found some areas where the plans were good, but they weren't implemented, or they were poorly implemented. And there were opportunities to go back and to have conversations with people with already having a starting point about, is this going the way that you expected? Is this still a priority? Is there an opportunity to maybe do this work differently or better? Yeah. So really starting with those first documents, and that led into the conversation. So I didn't feel like I was starting from ground zero. It was actually a nice place to start for us.
Yeah, and either were you coming in and saying, okay, district, this is what my vision is, and we're going to do it without any input from
in fact, when you look at the PAUSD promise and even the format, our real commitment to making it user-friendly, reader-friendly.
Put it online for the first time, or in a website format.
In a website format, exactly. In the website format was practical and symbolic. It's practical in that that's where people go for information now. You shouldn't have to come to the district office and pull a binder off of a wall. But also it shows that the plan itself, the elements can change over time. The core beliefs won't. And that's been the message to the district staff, that the 5 core beliefs are just as true now as they were when I was in high school. And hopefully they'll be true in 30 years from now. How we address those, that's an evolution. And I expect those to evolve over time.
As you mentioned, and I know you heard from the board a lot over the course of getting feedback on the plan, was the district's sort of longstanding frustration and trouble with, having best intentions and launching plans and ideas or mentioning goals, and then they sort of fall by the wayside, or there's no way to check in on them regularly and with fidelity. And so you've added some elements to the plan to make sure that doesn't happen and to provide more accountability. Can you walk us through sort of the schedule of deliverables and what that
Sure.
means, and how you're going to be reporting back to the board and the public on your actual progress?
Yeah. So great point. I would say the work in the past was all built on best intentions, but in some places it didn't have the follow through, the accountability, predetermined metrics, evaluation cycles, all those things that are important for running a high functioning organization. There were holes. So what we've done here is not only did we strip this down to really basic language that everyone can clearly understand, but then we placed it on, this afternoon our board will get the draft of our board agendas for the entire school year. Each of the 12 points has places throughout the year where it's already pre-scheduled, so we know with certainty that it's going to be addressed. We have a metrics deliverable schedule, which will show not only what information comes to the board monthly as data points, but where large data points will come in and be accompanied by reports and presentations.
So like big district-wide survey results and that kind of data.
Yeah, and one thing I'm trying to shift us away from is waiting for the big high stakes presentation data ta-da moment, and instead break things into smaller chunks, routine checks, so we can make shifts where shifts are allowable. And the last part of this, I'm trying to tie our evaluations to this document, and it's one of the things I want to do, not only my own evaluation, executive cabinets, and our principals, so that we don't have a system that still measures things that are no longer our priorities or identified goals. It's going to be quantitative in a lot of places, but we're still trying to maintain the spirit of why kids come to school and what you remember when you leave.
Yeah, I noticed that each of the goals has kind of short or vision points. The 12 has the short term, medium term, and long term. So I presume that you set out the short term so you can see some progress moving forward and identify where things are going off the rails if they are, and bring them back.
A loose way of thinking about the short term, midterm, and long term is short and mid are things that we plan to touch this year and have outcomes that are hopefully impacted this year. The other thing that I've told everybody, including our team, is that if our outcomes aren't positive or don't positively impact the things that we're trying to make a difference in, fine, we're going to report that, and then we'll adjust and shift. So we're not trying to prove success, we're trying to report accurately our progress. And where we're not making progress, and if we know that earlier, great. An opportunity to either step away from what we were doing or to adjust it.
So I'd love to dive into just a couple of the 12. We can't cover all 12 right now. One thing that rises to the top, I think, of everyone's consciousness is school safety in this kind of climate nationally. What have you found about school safety as a status quo right now, and where do you hope to take the district?
I think we're in a place now where we can't think about school safety the way we used to, right? I mean, every week you turn on the news and there's something else tragic, and we can't insulate our schools, kids, any better than any other public place to some degree. This is not a place that's going to go build 12-foot fences around all of our campuses. It's just not going to happen. And the reality is, for schools and districts that do that, those fences are only as good as the last person who walked through the gate. Okay, but we can be smarter about our preparation and some of our monitoring. When it comes to safety now, the best thing you can do is to get the most accurate, quick information and react to it as soon as possible. So we really want to have a system that not only monitors and allows people to give us information on the front end, whether it's a tip line or knowing that they can go to a caring adult that will act with information, but also monitoring perimeter fencing with cameras and things so that we have an extended view of what's out there, and where we can make changes with architecture or landscape design to narrow our entry points to campuses in ways that are consistent with the community. We should absolutely take advantage of those.
Yeah, it does seem like from the communication standpoint that many incidences that have happened, people knew or people had some suspicions of potential danger and tried to get some help.
Well, it's amazing when you go back. Typically, you go back and you retrace who knew what after a situation happened, and it's always sad. Not always, it's often sad that people had information and didn't know what to do with it or didn't treat it seriously. So we're really trying to make sure everyone understands we want to treat those situations seriously. We have a good relationship with our police department. We've talked to them about drills and how we want to move forward. Feel good about where we're at there. Our board today will get a first look at a safety position, one that we had approved a job description for last year, but now we think we're ready to move forward. This is a person that can actually coordinate school safety plans and drill efforts and be a real liaison, so if there's an issue, there'll be no confusion at all about who you would call and contact and who will be on your site immediately.
This would be a full-time person initially?
Yes.
Is that typical in other districts you've worked in, or is that a sort of a new idea for a position?
Depends. So almost every district will have somebody designated as part of a job.
Right.
I think, quite honestly, that we're not in a position right now that I feel real comfortable about where we're at.
With safety?
With safety. So I think a purely dedicated safety person right now makes sense for our school district. Mm-hmm. And it's not to panic people. I mean, we have a good safety record, but that record is as good as what you have in place. Mm-hmm. And we have some work to do.
I wanted to ask you about Cubberley. So I'm going to pivot a little bit, and the board's going to talk about Cubberley.
That is a pivot.
This afternoon at the board retreat, just starting at 1:15 today. Mm-hmm. This is a years-long process, and it's unclear to me sort of how things are going to progress in a productive way, given the school district is still sort of figuring out what it wants, and the city has indicated different priorities it wants to have, and now there are questions also about the city's lease agreement with the school district. So I'm just wondering, given where the school district is at, what's going to move this process forward, and what do you hope to see with Cubberley this year?
So I can speak to several of those pieces as the superintendent, but our board will have their first formal on-the-record group discussion today. So I'm looking forward to that and can take direction from our board today. Well, I don't anticipate votes. I think direction will be pretty clear after today. I think there are a couple things that are challenging. The pace and sense of urgency between the school district and the city is different. The city clearly wants an accelerated pace to the next step, and the school district really does not have a need for an accelerated pace of urgency when it comes to the development of that property. First, our core mission is to serve our students and build schools and maintain our schools. So the development piece of the recreational part of Cubberley is just not as front burner as it is for the city, and that doesn't make the city wrong. It just means that we have different core goals and things that we're touching immediately. Next, it's an awkward conversation to get the two bodies together. So right now, the city has worked through the mechanics piece through their process, and we haven't had a joint opportunity to have a conversation. So it's been staff to staff with some updates. The city manager and I meet every month. We have a great relationship, but we're limited in how far we can go because neither of us has a really decision-making authority at this point. So our challenge right now is not trying to make the decision, but trying to decide how the two bodies can get to a place to make decisions together. Mm-hmm. And that's challenging.
Todd Collins, one of the board members, suggested towards the end of the last school year that maybe the district and the city should move together as neighbors rather than partners. And, you share a fence, but not really going on the same track exactly. Do you agree with that approach?
Yeah, so I think Mr. Collins' thought on that makes some sense. If you want to build facilities, when you start talking about financing jointly and that ownership and agreements in the future, that introduces a level of challenges that are sticky at best. What does that look like, the neighbors versus partners? I don't think anyone's envisioning a fence dividing off our properties at all. I have a long-standing partnership that allows the field usage, gymnasium, theater. Mm-hmm. I don't know why we would change that. I'm not sure there's a compelling reason to change that. Mm-hmm. The city does have a designated additional 8 acres. So we could literally be, if we want to use that analogy, neighbors in a way that it would appear seamless. And I think that's what he's thinking. I don't know, and I know that because he's stated it publicly. Several of our board members have not made a public statement on that. Today will be the first time. Then you touched on the lease. Our lease does expire soon.
December.
In December, that's pretty soon. It would be my hope that we can extend that lease for a period of time, and I think that period is debatable.
And was there some indication that the city council might not renew the lease agreement, which Todd Collins also brought up at the city school liaison committee yesterday?
Yeah, through our staff-to-staff work, we had talked about the idea of a 2-year extension, and then we kind of scaled that back to 1 year. At one point, we had even said, well, would the school district consider 6 months? Again, I don't have decision-making power on that, but if we extended 6 months and got 4 months into it, needed to extend again, that's not the end of the world. Yeah. Certainly beats a December, end point. And now that does not seem to be on the table in the same way it was, and I don't know if that's a city council direction or if it's just a gut feeling. The city council chose to have their discussion on the topic in closed session, so we don't know. I believe we are committed to having our discussions about this topic in open session. And again, it's a completely allowable closed session topic. I just don't think that's the direction we're going to go. So if there's any confusion about our thoughts on it, I think that should be erased today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seemed like the last time that the school board talked about this was following the conclusion of the city's process with their multiple meetings and their consultant and all that. And there was a definite difference in the sense of urgency.
Yes. I
think the city is like, let's make a decision yesterday.
Right.
And the school district, to date, the school board has kind of wanted to leave options open.
And to be fair, the sequencing is challenging. Who goes first? Who gets to make the first statement about what should happen? I mean, that's there's no fault in that, and there's no right or wrong. It's just we're on different timetables. I think we're more interested, and we'll have on our draft agenda today a full discussion about staff housing. That's something I really have a pretty strong interest in. Some board members, I believe, will also, and that's really more looking at that 525 San Antonio site than the Cubberley site, but that is part of the whole discussion. So that would be a higher priority for us to have some really quick conversations about. Mm-hmm. We tentatively have a joint study session scheduled for October 28th, but neither the council or our board has officially taken action to schedule that, but that's where it is on our tentative calendar.
Has the board taken some action or made a recommendation on teacher housing, sort of specifically, like what that would look like or how many units?
So there's a couple indicators for where the board is looking at that. They did ask us to do a study with our staff, which we did in the spring and published, which showed strong desire for teachers to, and well, not just teachers, but staff to participate in a housing program, not unlike what several of our surrounding districts are doing. And they also officially put in our resolution when it came to the Cubberley plus San Antonio property to look at three things: maintaining sites for a future high school should the need arise, possible relocation of the district office, and staff housing. So to that end, the board has signaled that they have an interest in pursuing, at least continuing the conversation to see if it makes sense for us. So, yeah, that's something we're going to look at pretty earnestly.
Okay. I wanted to bring up the issue that Elena surfaced in her back-to-school coverage on grades and kind of moving to a different model for evaluating students. I know that there's some kind of cultural friction there, people who like the standard traditional grades versus the people who kind of want more indicators of student success that may not be pegged to a specific letter. What's the district doing in terms of student evaluation at this point?
Yeah, we've made some nice progress. That predated my arrival here. You think about careers, right, your jobs. Very rarely do you get an opportunity to do one thing once, have it evaluated, and then labeled by it forever, right? I would imagine that even here, you will turn in something, someone's going to look at it. There might be revisions, feedback. You have an opportunity to look at it again. In most cases, why would school be any different? And if the idea is that we want students to learn the material and to master it and to move forward with some proficiency, why would we say, and by the way, you get one chance at it, right? So this whole idea of allowing students to receive feedback and to see it more of a process than a judgment makes sense. I think it fits with the culture of Palo Alto. Think about our tech industry here. If someone had an idea, a proposal, and they tried something and it didn't work, would we fire them? Right? You would probably look at that and say, well, is there a chance to go back and tweak this, evolve it, make it better? I think that's where education should be also.
As part of the startup culture, to keep trying after you fail many times.
Yeah, now, the friction comes with, at the end of the day, a lot of parents still want to see a letter grade. And for right now, they're going to. But how we arrive on that letter grade might look a little different.
Do you think there would come a day in Palo Alto or in the Palo Alto School District where it would be all evidence-based grades, so no letter grades at all?
As I think back on my career, that would be, right now, this very second, I would think that's a little bit to the radical side. But lots of things that I thought 20 years ago were going to be radical are now just common practice. I think there's potential that could happen, yes.
Another big ticket item on the horizon is the Stanford General Use Permit.
I've heard of it.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was wondering if you could just update people on, there was a lot of action and back and forth on what would happen, what Stanford would potentially provide to the school district, and some friction over that as well. Where do things stand, and has the district had further discussions with Stanford?
Yes, I have had further discussions with Stanford, mostly just to reiterate their commitment to us. And where Stanford stands as of today is where they've stood for several months now, publicly, privately, everywhere in between, that they plan to honor our agreement that we reached. It's an agreement I feel really good about. Again, looking just for what was required for them through the original proposal would have been about $4.2 million. Right now, as it sits, rough math on it's about $138.4 million. Far exceeds what anyone thought we would be able to negotiate. I think there was no other mechanism to get to an ongoing funding source or anything tied to per pupil funding. The 2-day negotiations with Stanford, and I say 2 days, it was certainly more than that, but the 2 concentrated days with a facilitator was complex, but not confrontational or contentious. I thought, kind of our joke has been, once we quit throwing mud across El Camino at each other and got into a room, we found out it wasn't that hard to work through some of the issues, especially once we better understood what was important to the other side. So I feel great about where we're at right now, and most importantly, it took our parents and community out of having to be in a constant fight and gear up political mess to some degree, and puts our attention back on teaching and learning and students. I feel like the financial piece was a necessary distraction, but we've resolved it in a way that really we've received almost no criticism from the people that understand the process about the actual financial terms of the deal. And there's been some criticism about other parts, but there always will be.
So the county has the process right now for the general use permit. Do you feel like there is support from the county for what you've agreed upon with Stanford? Are you feeling like that's you're pretty confident in the county's handling of the process?
Sure. I mean, the county has never told us that the terms of what we reached with the financial piece and ongoing funding and some one-time money of about another $15 million was bad. In fact, they've said exactly the opposite, that it exceeded expectations. At this point, I understand the county and the county supervisors have to look at the giant picture, and it's very complicated. I mean, you start looking at that, and it brings in things like rail and zero net trips and housing. I just had to try to solve the part that related to the school district,
right.
and that was complicated enough.
Right.
But I had confidence in the county to be able to work this thing through, and confidence in Stanford to be able to work with the county, and I expect a resolution at some point in time. And when kids start showing up from a future development, we know exactly what will be coming with them.
I had one question going back to the PAUSD promise. So I saw in the special ed goal area that there's something called goalbook or
Yes.
goalbook software.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if that's something, can you explain what that is?
Yes.
And then why that's a kind of focus of the goal?
Yeah, so when you go back to saying we're going to set expectations and try to impact outcomes and have pre-identified metrics, it all starts with a good goal. And every time you introduce another person, it introduces another variable, right? So if we have hundreds of people who touch IEPs, when it comes to writing the goals and what metrics we're going to use to evaluate them and how we're going to know if we're successful or not, you have potentially hundreds of interpretations about how to write a goal and what our resources are and what programs we can use and services we can provide to families and the students. Goalbook just streamlines that. So you can take a goal that we as a district know is a common goal for us. We can attach it to a metrics, and it will come through Goalbook in a way that will be consistent for all parents. So again, it's that idea of trying to create a consistent and predictable environment for students, staff, and the parents.
So is it an actual a software
It is a
program
software.
that both parents and staff will have access to?
So instead of coming up with a goal at a table like this and trying to write it out, okay, in a way that makes sense, and I can tell you through writing the PAUSD promise with our team, writing goals is not as easy as people think, right? When you really start to get into it, it's pretty easy to tear things apart. You have a word that doesn't make sense or can be misinterpreted. Goalbook will look at those goals that are common and have a common written phrasing or sentence or metrics attached to the goal. So that's what it does. It just gives you a consistent block.
So it can't be misinterpreted or interpreted variously.
I think anything can be misinterpreted, but we're going to hope that what it does is if we have the same exact student need, Elena isn't writing that one way and I'm not writing it a totally different way to address the same exact issue, we can have some consistency. And now when we have to bring in a third party or additional help to interpret or to try to mitigate a concern, we're not starting with trying to understand why she wrote it one way and I wrote something totally different.
Yeah. Does that software then, is that also used to translate the goal into action so that everyone's
Yes.
kind of on the same implementation
Yeah.
plan?
Yeah, so it can help it's just a consistency tool. And it does not mean that we're lockstep. I mean, the bank is massive, and of course you can work within it to customize. But some things are very, very routine, right? Some things you're using similar phrasing on certain goals. This will help us there. It'll help us train them up.
Okay. Well, we could go on and on and on. There's so much going on in the district, but I think we'll need to pause that for right now.
Okay.
So thank you so much for being here, and best of luck as the school year starts.
Okay, thank you.
That wraps up this edition of Behind the Headlines. If you think there's someone who would like to hear this discussion or be interested in these topics, there's a share link below. You can just copy that and send it out on email or social media. And for all the latest news, go to paloaltoonline.com. We'll see you next week.